You're here to relax, and I'm here to guide you. Before we begin, take a deep breath. Let go of everything that happened today. This moment is just for you. In the calm of the night, or the stillness of the early morning, wherever you are, I'd love to know, which city are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? Leave a comment below. I read every single one, and it helps me feel closer to you, even across the distance. Now close your eyes if you'd like. Let's begin. I never should have gone back to Pine Grove. That's what I keep telling myself as I sit here, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of what happened. But hindsight is cruel that way, crystal clear when it's too late to matter. It started with an invitation. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter with no return address. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive looking, with my name written in elegant cursive. Inside was a card embossed with gold trim. You are cordially invited to the annual Pine Grove Easter celebration, April 20th, 2025, the Harrington Estate. Below that, in handwriting, I recognized instantly. David, it's been 15 years. Time to come home. The family misses you, Uncle Guns. 15 years since I'd left that small town in upstate New York. 15 years since the incident that tore our family apart. An incident everyone blamed on me, though no one ever said it to my face. I'd built a life in Boston. A modest apartment, a job editing technical manuals, a cat named Fitzgerald. It wasn't exciting, but it was mine, and it was safe. I should have thrown the invitation away. Instead, I found myself requesting time off work, packing a suitcase, and telling myself I was finally ready to face the past. The drive to Pine Grove took just under 4 hours. With each mile, the knot in my stomach tightened. Modern buildings gave way to farmland, then to dense forest, until finally I passed the weathered wooden sign. Welcome to Pine Grove, Est 1803, Pop 2741. Main Street hadn't changed. The same red brick storefronts, the same town square with its gazebo. Even Millie's Diner looked frozen in time, its neon sign flickering in the same broken pattern I remembered from childhood. I checked into the only motel in town, a place called the Pinecone Inn. The woman at the front desk, probably in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, studied me with narrowed eyes as I signed the guest book. David Harrington, she read aloud. Any relation to the Harringtons up on the hill? Distant, I lied. Just in town for the Easter celebration. She handed me a key attached to a wooden fob. Room 7, around back. As I turned to leave, she added, "Careful up at that house. Not everything's as festive as they make it seem." I wanted to ask what she meant, but something in her expression stopped me. Instead, I nodded and headed to my room. A sparse space with wood-paneled walls and a bed that sagged in the middle. I unpacked slowly, postponing the moment when I'd have to drive up to the Harrington estate. From my window, I could see it perched on the hill that overlooked the town, a Victorian monstrosity of gables and turrets, owned by my family for generations. My phone buzzed, a text from a number I didn't recognize. "We heard you're back. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. It's going to be just like old times." The message sent a chill down my spine. Old times. That was exactly what I was afraid of. I spent the day wandering around Pine Grove, reacquainting myself with a place I'd tried so hard to forget. The town had always revolved around the Harrington family. My great-great-grandfather founded the lumber mill that built the town's economy. Subsequent generations diversified into pharmaceuticals, and now Harrington Industries employed half the town. The public park bore our name, so did the library and the high school gymnasium. Growing up, I'd taken this legacy for granted. As the youngest son of the youngest son, I was peripheral to the family business, but still treated with deference around town. That deference ended 15 years ago, after what happened in the woods behind the estate on Easter Sunday. My cousin Emily disappeared during the annual egg hunt. She was found 3 days later, physically unharmed, but changed, vacant-eyed and silent. She never spoke again, and she died in a mental institution 2 years later. I was the last person seen with her. I was 17, she was 7. I had no alibi for the hours she was missing, and though I told everyone I'd been alone in my room reading, no one believed me. There wasn't enough evidence to charge me with anything, but the suspicion never faded. Shortly after, I left for college and never came back, until now. I stopped by the cemetery on my way back to the motel. Emily's grave was simple, a marble stone with her name, dates, and the inscription, "Beloved Daughter." Someone had left fresh daisies, her favorite. I stood there for a long time, the question that had haunted me for 15 years still unanswered. What really happened to her that day? I knew what everyone thought, but I also knew I was innocent. And now, for some reason, the family wanted me back for Easter. The timing couldn't be coincidental. As I turned to leave, I noticed a man watching me from behind a nearby mausoleum. When our eyes met, he quickly walked away, but not before I caught a glimpse of his face. My cousin Thomas, Emily's older brother. On Easter Eve, I finally drove up to the Harrington estate. The wrought iron gates were open, as if expecting me. The gravel driveway crunched beneath my tires as I wound my way up the hill. The house loomed larger than I remembered. 4 stories of Victorian architecture against the twilight sky. Lights glowed in most windows, and several luxury cars were parked in the circular drive. Uncle James greeted me at the door. At 72, he was still imposing, over 6 feet tall with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes, the patriarch who had run the family business with an iron fist for 40 years. "David," he said, his voice exactly as I remembered it, deep and commanding. "You look well." "Thank you for the invitation," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. He clasped my shoulder and led me inside. Family should be together at Easter, especially this year. The entrance hall was decorated for the holiday. Vases of lilies on every surface, pastel ribbons draped along the grand staircase. A massive painting of my grandparents watched over the space, their expressions stern even in oil paint. "Everyone's in the drawing room," Uncle James said. "They're eager to see you." That was a lie, and we both knew it. No one had contacted me in 15 years. No one had defended me when the whispers started. But I followed him anyway, through the familiar corridors of my childhood, to face the family that had silently accused me. The drawing room fell quiet as I entered. Aunt Margaret, Uncle James's wife, sat rigidly on a Victorian settee. My cousins, Robert, William, and Thomas, stood near the fireplace, glasses of amber liquid in their hands. Their wives were clustered on the opposite side of the room, pretending to admire a floral arrangement. "Look who's finally arrived," Uncle James announced. The silence stretched for several uncomfortable seconds before Aunt Margaret rose. "David," she said, her voice clipped, "how nice of you to accept our invitation." One by one, they greeted me. Handshakes from the men, air kisses from the women, all going through the motions of family reunion while their eyes remained cold. Thomas was the last to approach. Emily's brother had been 19 when she disappeared. Now in his mid-30s, his face showed lines of hardship, and his handshake was painfully tight. "Didn't expect to see you back here," he said quietly. "I was invited," I replied. "Yes," he nodded. "You were. Interesting timing, don't you think?" Before I could ask what he meant, Uncle James called for attention. "Now that we're all here, I have an announcement," he said. "As you know, tomorrow is a special day. Not just Easter, but the 15th anniversary of our dear Emily's tragedy." The room grew even quieter. "I've decided it's time to heal old wounds. Tomorrow, after the Easter service, we will have our traditional egg hunt. And then, we will gather in the library for the reading of a document I've prepared. A document that will reveal the truth, about what happened 15 years ago. Every eye in the room turned to me. "The truth?" I asked, my throat suddenly dry. Uncle James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The truth, David. Isn't that what we all want?" That night, in the guest room I'd been assigned, my childhood bedroom, unchanged down to the model airplanes hanging from the ceiling, I couldn't sleep. What truth was Uncle James planning to reveal? And why invite me back after all these years just to publicly accuse me? Unless he knew something I didn't. Unless he had proof of what really happened to Emily. Around midnight, a soft knock came at my door. When I opened it, I found a small basket with a single item inside. A hollow plastic Easter egg, lavender in color. Inside was a folded piece of paper with 4 words. "I know you're innocent." Easter morning dawned bright and clear. I'd barely slept, turning the lavender egg over and over in my hands, wondering who had left it. The handwriting wasn't familiar, a neat print that could have belonged to anyone. Breakfast was a formal affair in the dining room. Place cards positioned me between Aunt Margaret and Thomas's wife, Sarah, who seemed determined to pretend I didn't exist. The conversation was stiffly polite, centered around safe topics. The weather, the church service to come, the children's excitement about the egg hunt. The children. I hadn't realized there would be children. But of course, my cousins had started families in the years I'd been gone. 5 kids in total, ranging from toddlers to preteens, sat at a smaller table in the corner, watched over by a nanny. "They've been looking forward to this for weeks," Robert's wife Jennifer said, following my gaze. "The Harrington Easter egg hunt is quite the tradition." "Yes," Aunt Margaret added coldly, "though we've made some changes since last time." The church service passed in a blur. St. Mark's Episcopal was packed, and the Harrington family occupied the entire front pew, as they had for generations. I felt eyes on me throughout the sermon, which appropriately focused on themes of resurrection and redemption. Back at the estate, the egg hunt was set to begin at 2 o'clock. The weather remained perfect, sunny and mild. Tables had been set up on the vast back lawn, laden with Easter-themed refreshments. About 50 people were in attendance, family, close friends, and high-ranking employees of Harrington Industries. Uncle James gathered everyone for the start of the hunt. The rules were simple. Colored eggs were hidden throughout the gardens and the edge of the woods. Children would collect them to exchange for prizes, while adults would search for special gold eggs containing tickets for a charity raffle. "And remember," Uncle James concluded, "the woods beyond the stone wall are strictly off-limits. We've roped off the permitted areas clearly." His eyes met mine as he said this, and I knew we were both thinking of Emily, who had disappeared after straying past that same stone wall. The hunt began with enthusiasm, children darting between flower beds and shrubs, while adults followed at a more leisurely pace. I participated half-heartedly, finding a few eggs but mostly watching the others, especially Thomas, who kept glancing in my direction. About 30 minutes in, I noticed one of the children, William's son, a boy of about 9, slipping under the rope and heading toward the forbidden woods. Without thinking, I followed him. "Hey," I called softly when I caught up. "This area's off-limits, we should go back." The boy, Matthew, I thought his name was, looked up at me with a strange expression. "Are you Uncle David, the one who hurt Aunt Emily?" I flinched. "I didn't hurt anyone. Who told you that?" "Everyone knows," he said simply. "But I found something." He held out his hand, revealing a lavender egg identical to the one I'd received last night. "Where did you get that?" I asked. He pointed deeper into the woods. "There's more. They make a trail." I hesitated, then made a decision. "Show me." Matthew led me along a barely visible path. Sure enough, every 20 feet or so, a lavender egg was placed conspicuously on a stump or rock. We collected them as we went, 5 in total. They're all empty, Matthew observed, shaking one near his ear. Not empty, I corrected, remembering the note in mine. Open them. Each egg contained a small slip of paper. Together they formed a message. I know you're innocent. Emily saw something. In the old greenhouse. Tonight at midnight. Come alone. What does it mean? Matthew asked. I'm not sure, I lied. Probably just part of a different game. We should get back before anyone misses us. As we turned to leave, a twig snapped nearby. I spun around, but saw nothing except shadows between trees. Let's go, I said, taking Matthew's hand. And let's keep this between us, okay? He nodded solemnly, and we hurried back toward the lawns and safety of the main event. We emerged from the woods to find the hunt winding down. Children were trading their eggs for chocolate bunnies and small toys at a prize table. Adults sipped champagne and compared their finds. No one seemed to have noticed our absence except Thomas, who watched us with narrowed eyes as we rejoined the group. I avoided his gaze and escorted Matthew to the prize table. At 4 o'clock precisely, Uncle James called for attention again. I hope everyone enjoyed the hunt, he said. Now, as promised, we'll proceed to the library for a special announcement. Family members only, please. My stomach tightened as I followed the Harringtons back into the house. Whatever truth Uncle James planned to reveal, I was about to face it. The library was exactly as I remembered it. Walls of leather-bound books, a massive oak desk, and the portrait of my great-grandfather above the fireplace. The family arranged themselves in chairs and sofas, while Uncle James took position behind the desk. 15 years ago, he began without preamble, our family suffered a terrible tragedy. Emily's experience left scars on all of us, some more visible than others. He opened a drawer and removed a folder. I've spent years investigating what really happened that day. At first, like many of you, I suspected David. Murmurs rippled through the room. I sat straight-backed, refusing to show reaction. But evidence can be misleading and assumptions can be wrong, Uncle James continued. I believe it's time to set the record straight. He opened the folder and withdrew several photographs. These were taken the day Emily disappeared. Security cameras were less common then, but we had one at the service entrance, installed because of a series of petty thefts. He laid the photos on the desk. They showed grainy images of the back of the house, time-stamped 3:17 p.m., right around when Emily went missing. As you can see, David is clearly visible here, entering the house alone, and the timestamp matches his claim that he went to his room to read. Shocked silence filled the room. Uncle James had just provided the alibi I'd lacked for 15 years. But if David didn't take Emily into the woods, Thomas said slowly, then who did? Uncle James's expression hardened. That's the question that's haunted me. The camera didn't capture anyone else with Emily. But I've recently come into possession of Emily's journal from that time. He held up a small book with a floral cover. Most of it is typical for a 7-year-old girl. Drawings, stories about her friends. But the final entry, dated the morning she disappeared, contained something disturbing. He read aloud. I saw them in the greenhouse last night. They were hurting someone. They said they'd hurt me too if I told. The room erupted in confused conversation. Uncle James raised a hand for silence. I believe Emily witnessed something in the old greenhouse, something that traumatized her so severely she couldn't speak of it. And I believe whoever was responsible later took her into the woods to silence her. But she was found physically unharmed, Aunt Margaret protested. Her body was unharmed, Uncle James corrected. Her mind never recovered. I found my voice at last. Why reveal this now? After 15 years? Uncle James looked directly at me. Because the old greenhouse is being demolished tomorrow to make way for a new wing of the house. If there's evidence there, this is our last chance to find it. And you invited me back because you deserve to be exonerated publicly, and because I need your help. You were closest to Emily. If she left any clues about what she saw, you might recognize their significance. The meeting broke up shortly after, with plans to examine the greenhouse the following morning. As people filed out, Thomas approached me. "I owe you an apology," he said stiffly. "I spent 15 years blaming you for what happened to my sister." "And now?" I asked. "Now I want to know the truth as much as you do." He hesitated. "Did you get a message about meeting at the greenhouse tonight?" I stared at him. "You left the eggs?" He nodded. "I found Emily's journal a week ago, before Uncle James. I've been doing my own investigation." "Why not just tell me directly?" "I wasn't sure who to trust," he admitted. "There are rumors about financial irregularities at Harrington Industries from around that time. Embezzlement, possibly worse. I think Emily might have witnessed something related to that." "And you think someone in the family was involved?" "I think someone was willing to traumatize a child to keep their secret," Thomas said grimly. "And yes, it was likely family." The hours until midnight crawled by. I tried to rest, but found myself instead poring over old family photographs I'd found in my room, studying the faces of people I'd once trusted implicitly. At 11:45, I slipped out of my room and made my way through the silent house. The old greenhouse stood about 100 yards from the main building, a Victorian structure of iron and glass that had fallen into disuse decades ago. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. Moonlight filtered through the glass panes, casting strange shadows among the remaining plant stands and shelves. "Thomas?" I called softly. No answer. I moved deeper into the space, using my phone's flashlight to illuminate the way. Dead plants crumbled at my touch. Broken pots littered the floor. At the far end, I found a door I didn't remember. It led to a small back room that must have been used for storage. And there, to my surprise, was a desk with a computer that looked decades old. "It still works," came a voice behind me. I spun around to find not Thomas, but Uncle James standing in the doorway. "Where's Thomas?" I demanded. "He won't be joining us," Uncle James said calmly. "I intercepted your little egg messages. Clever, but not clever enough. You knew about them, but you still put on that whole show in the library. A necessary performance," he said, stepping closer. "I needed to know how much you and Thomas had figured out." My mind raced. Emily's journal, was that real? Oh yes, she did see something in here, unfortunately for her. The implication hit me like a physical blow. It was you. You did something to Emily. Uncle James sighed. "Not intentionally. She wasn't supposed to be here that night. No one was. But she saw things a 7-year-old shouldn't see. Financial records being altered. Evidence being created. The embezzlement Thomas mentioned. More than that, industrial accidents that weren't accidents. Product safety data that was manipulated. Harrington Industries has skeletons that would destroy it if revealed." He moved to the ancient computer and turned it on. The screen flickered to life. "This system isn't connected to any network. The perfect place to store files that should never see daylight." He typed briefly, and the screen filled with spreadsheets. Emily didn't understand what she saw, but she knew it was wrong. She was going to tell her father. "So you took her into the woods," I said, pieces falling into place. "What did you do to her?" Uncle James's expression darkened. "I only meant to frighten her into silence, but she panicked, ran, fell, hit her head badly. When she regained consciousness, she couldn't speak. Traumatic mutism, the doctors called it, a psychological response to extreme stress. Horror washed over me. And you let everyone think I was responsible." "It was convenient," he admitted. "The black sheep nephew with the history of behavior problems. Who would question it? And now, Why bring me back just to tell me this? Because Thomas found the journal and started asking questions. I needed to control the narrative. Uncle James reached into his jacket and withdrew a revolver. Unfortunately, now I have a new problem to solve. As he raised the gun, the greenhouse door burst open. Thomas stood there, blood running from a cut on his forehead. I heard everything, he said, his voice shaking with rage. You destroyed my sister's life. You let us blame David for 15 years. Uncle James turned slightly, keeping the gun trained on me but glancing at Thomas. You shouldn't have followed me after our little disagreement. Put the gun down, Thomas said, stepping forward. It's over, Uncle James. I called the police before I came in. They're on their way. Then I don't have much time, Uncle James replied and swung the gun toward Thomas. I lunged, grabbing his arm. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the confined space. Glass shattered somewhere. We struggled, Thomas joining the fight. Another shot, this one going wild through the greenhouse roof. Then a third shot, and Uncle James staggered back, a look of surprise on his face. He collapsed to the floor, the gun falling from his hand. Thomas stood frozen, hands empty. I turned to see Aunt Margaret in the doorway, a small pistol in her steady grip. Margaret, Uncle James gasped. Why? For Emily, she said simply, and for all the others who were hurt by your greed. She lowered the gun and looked at me. I knew it wasn't you, David. I've suspected James for years, but never had proof. When he started this charade about exonerating you, I knew he was planning something desperate. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Uncle James's breathing grew labored, blood spreading across his shirt. The computer, he whispered. Everything's there. All the evidence. We know, Thomas said. It's over now. That was 3 days ago. The investigation is ongoing, but the truth is finally emerging. Uncle James died before the ambulance arrived, taking many secrets with him. The old computer from the greenhouse, however, has yielded decades of financial fraud and criminal negligence. Aunt Margaret is cooperating with authorities. She explained that she'd followed Uncle James that night, 15 years ago, and witnessed what he did to Emily, but feared for her own children's safety if she spoke out. Her guilt had grown over the years until she couldn't stay silent any longer. The family is in shambles. Harrington Industries stock has plummeted. Reporters camp outside the estate gates. But amidst the chaos, there's a strange sense of clarity. The fog of suspicion that hung over me for 15 years has finally lifted. This morning, Thomas and I visited Emily's grave together. We laid lavender flowers beside the headstone. I'm sorry I blamed you, he said for perhaps the 10th time. You were protecting your sister's memory, I replied. I understand. We stood in silence for a while before he spoke again. What will you do now? I'm not sure, I admitted. I can't go back to my old life, not after everything that's happened. Stay, he suggested. Help us rebuild the company into something honest, something Emily would be proud of. I looked up at the Harrington estate on the hill, intimidating even in the spring sunshine. For the first time, I saw it not as a place of fear and accusation, but as something that could be redeemed. Maybe I will, I said. After all, Easter is about resurrection, isn't it? As we walked back to the car, I spotted something in the grass, a plastic egg, lavender in color. I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a small photograph I recognized instantly. Emily and me, laughing together on an Easter morning long ago, before secrets and silence tore our family apart. I don't know who left it there. Perhaps Aunt Margaret? Perhaps someone else who wanted me to remember Emily as she had been, not as tragedy made her. But in that moment, it felt like a message from beyond. A reminder that the truth, however painful, brings its own kind of freedom. The Harrington Easter egg hunt is over. The secrets have been found, and finally, after 15 years, we can begin to heal. The gentle rhythm of steel on tracks had always been a comfort to me. This cross-country journey from Boston to San Francisco was supposed to be my escape, a chance to clear my head after the messy end of my engagement and the subsequent departure from my job. 3 days on America's railways, watching the landscape transform from urban sprawl to rolling plains to majestic mountains. I'd splurged on a private sleeper compartment, a small luxury that felt necessary for the journey ahead. As the Amtrak pulled away from Boston's South Station, I settled into my seat and watched the city slowly recede. Rain streaked across the window, distorting the view of the industrial outskirts as we gained speed. I'd always been drawn to train travel. There's something nostalgic about it, something honest that flying lacks. On a train, you feel every mile, experience the gradual transitions between places. My compartment was compact but comfortable. A bench seat that converted to a bed, a small fold-down table, and a window framed by faded blue curtains. The attendant, a middle-aged man with tired eyes named Marcus, had already shown me how everything worked and promised to check in periodically throughout the journey. "First time on the California Zephyr?" he'd asked while demonstrating how to convert the seat to a bed. "First time on any long-distance train," I admitted. He nodded appreciatively. "You picked a good one. Just wait until we hit the Rockies." By evening, we had passed through upstate New York and were continuing westward. I'd spent most of the day reading and staring out the window, occasionally venturing to the observation car to stretch my legs. Dinner in the dining car was a communal affair. I was seated with an elderly couple heading to Chicago to visit their grandchildren and a business traveler who barely looked up from his laptop. The conversation was pleasant enough, but I was grateful to return to the solitude of my compartment afterward. As the light faded, the window became a black mirror, occasionally illuminated by distant farmhouses or small towns that appeared and vanished like apparitions in the night. I was about to prepare my bed when I noticed something peculiar. In the reflection of the window, I could see my compartment door opening slowly. I turned, expecting to see Marcus with turn-down service, but the doorway was empty. The door simply stood ajar, swaying slightly with the motion of the train. "Hello," I called out, receiving no response except the constant clacking of wheels on track. I got up and checked the corridor. It was empty in both directions, just the gentle sway of the train and the dim night lights along the floor. I closed my door firmly, making sure the latch clicked into place, and tried to dismiss the incident as a mechanical issue caused by the train's movement. I awoke sometime in the middle of the night as we pulled into a station. The announcement system crackled to life, announcing Cleveland in a garbled voice that seemed to come from another era. Through my window, I could see a nearly empty platform under harsh fluorescent lights. A solitary figure stood motionless in the distance, watching our train. I checked my watch. 2:17 a.m. The station stop would be brief. I was about to turn over and go back to sleep when something caught my eye. A passenger was boarding our car, a tall, thin man in what looked like an outdated suit. He moved with unusual stiffness, his face obscured by shadow. Something about his manner made me uneasy, though I couldn't explain why. As the train pulled away from the station, I tried to fall back asleep, but found myself listening intently to the sounds of the train. Somewhere down the corridor, I heard footsteps moving slowly, deliberately. They paused outside several compartments before continuing. I held my breath when they stopped outside mine. The handle of my door moved downward slightly, testing if it was locked. I hadn't locked it. I didn't even know the compartments had locks. The handle returned to position, and after what seemed like an eternity, the footsteps continued down the corridor. Sleep didn't come easily after that. Morning brought fog and drizzle as we crossed into the Midwest. I asked Marcus about the late-night boarding in Cleveland. Cleveland? We were running behind schedule, so we skipped the Cleveland stop altogether, he said with certainty. Straight through to Toledo. I described the passenger I'd seen, the tall man in the old-fashioned suit. Marcus frowned. We didn't take on any new passengers overnight. The only people who boarded were crew members changing shifts. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Is there any way to lock my compartment door? I asked, trying to sound casual. Sure, there's a deadbolt above the handle. Just slide it across, he demonstrated quickly. Everything okay? Some people find it hard to sleep their first night on a train. I nodded, not wanting to seem paranoid. Just being cautious with my belongings. During breakfast, I scanned the dining car for the man I'd seen boarding, but didn't spot anyone matching his description. The day passed uneventfully as we crossed through Indiana and Illinois. I spent most of it in the observation car, watching the flat Midwestern landscape roll by, occasionally chatting with other passengers. Nobody mentioned anything unusual. That evening after dinner, I returned to find my compartment exactly as I'd left it, yet something felt different. My book wasn't quite where I'd left it. My suitcase seemed to have shifted position. Small things that could easily be explained by the motion of the train, yet together they created a sense of intrusion. I locked my compartment door that night. The second night, somewhere in Nebraska, I woke suddenly. The train was moving steadily, rhythmically through the darkness. At first I couldn't identify what had disturbed my sleep. Then I noticed there was someone sitting in the corner of my compartment. A silhouette darker than the surrounding darkness occupied the small chair by the door. I could make out the outline of a man in a suit, sitting perfectly still, watching me. I froze, unable to move or cry out. "Who are you?" I finally managed to whisper. No response. Just the steady sound of the train and something else. A faint, raspy breathing that didn't match my own. I reached for my phone to use as a flashlight, fumbling in the dark. When the light came on, the corner was empty. I sat up for the remainder of the night, back pressed against the wall, eyes fixed on that corner. Sleep was impossible. When morning finally came, I went immediately to find the conductor. "Sir, I need to report an intruder in my compartment," I began, aware of how unstable I must have sounded. The conductor, a veteran railroader with a weathered face, listened patiently to my story. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "You're in compartment D7, correct?" When I confirmed, he sighed. "There's something you should know about that compartment." He explained that 5 years ago, a passenger had died of natural causes in that very compartment. A retired railroad employee who was making one final journey across the country. Some crew members claimed they'd occasionally felt a presence in that compartment since then. "I don't believe in that sort of thing myself," the conductor added quickly. "But I can move you to another compartment if you'd prefer." I accepted immediately. My new compartment was identical to the first but felt entirely different. Lighter somehow, less oppressive. I told myself the conductor's story had been meant to humor a nervous passenger. Nothing more. Yet that night, as we crossed the Colorado border, I found myself drawn to the observation car, unable to face sleep just yet. The car was empty except for one other passenger, an elderly man gazing out at the moonlit landscape. I took a seat several rows away, not wanting to disturb him. After a few minutes, he turned and nodded at me. "Can't sleep?" he asked. I admitted I couldn't. "The trains speak to some people," he said cryptically. "They carry more than just passengers." Something about his manner made me uneasy. "What do you mean?" "Memories. Moments. Sometimes they get stuck in the journey, replaying over and over." He smiled sadly. "I rode these rails for 43 years as an engineer. Now I ride as a passenger when I can. Never gets old. A cold realization washed over me. How long have you been on this train? His eyes, when they met mine, seemed to look through me rather than at me. Longer than I should have been. But this is my last trip. I just wanted to see the Rockies one more time. He turned back to the window, and I sat frozen in my seat. When I finally gathered the courage to look again, the seat where he'd been sitting was empty. I hurried back to my new compartment, locked the door, and didn't emerge until we reached Denver the next morning. I never saw the man again during the remainder of the journey, though I searched every car. When I discreetly described him to Marcus, his face paled slightly. "Sounds like you met old Charlie," he said quietly. "He was a legend on this route. Passed away in his sleep on this very train a few years back, compartment D7. For the remainder of the journey through the magnificent Rockies and across the Nevada desert, I kept to myself, avoiding empty cars and never wandering the train after dark. By the time we pulled into San Francisco, I had convinced myself I had experienced nothing more than exhaustion and an overactive imagination stimulated by a railroad ghost story. Yet sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I can still hear the rhythmic clacking of wheels on track and feel unseen eyes watching me through the darkness. And I know with certainty that some journeys once begun never truly end. I've always been a bargain hunter. Since college, when surviving on ramen and odd jobs was my entire financial strategy, I developed a knack for finding deals. Thrift stores, garage sales, clearance racks, I'd scoured them all. So when Facebook Marketplace became a thing, it felt like the digital evolution of my weekend hobby. An endless stream of secondhand treasures, all cataloged and searchable from my couch. April in Minneapolis meant unpredictable weather. 60 degrees one day, snow flurries the next. I had recently moved into my first house after years of apartment living, a modest two-bedroom craftsman in Northeast that needed more work than I'd initially realized. The previous owners had left behind a peculiar assortment of outdated fixtures and questionable design choices that my limited budget couldn't immediately address. The kitchen was my primary concern. The ancient refrigerator hummed loudly before dying altogether during my second week in the house. After the financial hit of the down payment, I couldn't justify spending retail prices on new appliances. That's when I turned to Facebook Marketplace. I spent an entire evening scrolling through listings, comparing prices and conditions of used refrigerators within a 20-mile radius. Nothing seemed quite right, either too expensive, too old, or too far away. I was about to give up when a new listing appeared. Stainless steel Samsung refrigerator, 2 years old, perfect condition, $400. The retail price for this model was well over $1,500. The photos showed a gleaming appliance that looked brand new. The listing had been posted by someone named Ray Mercer from Summit Avenue in St. Paul, one of the wealthiest streets in the Twin Cities, lined with historic mansions. That explained the luxury appliance at a fire sale price. Rich people were often the ones who cared least about recouping value, I'd learned, sometimes practically giving away high-end items simply to avoid the hassle of proper reselling. Moving unexpectedly, the description read, "Must sell immediately. First come, first served." I messaged immediately, "Is this still available? I can pick up tomorrow with cash." The response came within minutes. "Available. Tomorrow works. Come at 2 p.m. I'll send the address." The address Ray sent wasn't actually on Summit Avenue, but a few blocks south on Portland Avenue. Still a nice area, but not quite the mansion district I'd expected. As I drove through the neighborhood the next day, I noted the large, well-maintained homes set back from tree-lined streets. Old money, quiet wealth. I pulled up to a two-story Victorian painted a subdued gray with white trim. Unlike its well-kept neighbors, this house showed subtle signs of neglect. Overgrown shrubs, paint peeling around the windows, a cracked step leading to the front door. Nothing alarming, just the kind of minor disrepair that suggested a homeowner who had other priorities. I double-checked the address against the one in my phone. This was it. I grabbed my phone and the envelope containing $400 in cash before approaching the house. The doorbell made no sound when I pressed it, so after waiting a moment, I knocked firmly. No response. I was about to knock again when I heard movement inside, a shuffling sound, then footsteps approaching the door. The man who opened the door was not what I expected. Based on the address and the high-end refrigerator, I'd imagined someone older, possibly retired, or a young professional couple upgrading their appliances. Instead, I faced a man in his 30s with disheveled dark hair and 3 days' worth of stubble. He wore wrinkled khakis and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled unevenly. His eyes were red-rimmed behind wireframe glasses. "You're here for the fridge?" he asked, his voice slightly hoarse. "Yes, I'm Alex. We messaged yesterday." "Right," he said, offering a quick handshake. His palm was clammy. "Come on in. It's in the kitchen." I hesitated briefly. In all my years of second-hand shopping, I developed a decent sense for when something felt off. There was an intensity to Ray's gaze that made me uncomfortable, but I reminded myself I was standing on the porch of a $500,000 home in broad daylight. I stepped inside. The interior of the house didn't match its prestigious address. The entryway was dimly lit, with moving boxes stacked against one wall. The hardwood floors, which must have been beautiful once, were scuffed and dull. A musty smell pervaded the air, not filthy, but stale, as if the windows hadn't been opened in months. "Kitchen's this way," Ray said, leading me through a formal dining room where a crystal chandelier hung over a table covered with more boxes and random items, papers, books, what looked like photo albums. Everything about the scene suggested someone packing in haste, with no real system. "You mentioned you're moving?" I asked, trying to make casual conversation. "Yeah, unexpected opportunity. Gotta be out by the end of the week." His tone was clipped, discouraging further questions. We entered the kitchen, which was surprisingly modern compared to the rest of what I'd seen. Granite countertops, cherry cabinets, and there, looking just as pristine as in the photos, was the Samsung refrigerator. "It's only a couple years old," Ray said, patting the stainless steel door. "Works perfectly." I opened it, finding it empty and spotlessly clean, almost too clean, as if it had been scrubbed thoroughly. The temperature felt right. All the components looked intact. "Looks good," I said. "I can do $400 as we agreed." Ray nodded, and I reached for the envelope in my pocket. As I counted out the bills, I noticed his hands were trembling slightly. "You need help getting it to your vehicle?" he asked. "I brought a dolly. My brother's meeting me here too," I lied. Something about Ray made me not want to admit I was alone. "He just texted that he's a few minutes away." Ray's expression flickered momentarily. "Great. I've got it unplugged already, just need to remove the water line." As he knelt to disconnect the water line, I glanced around the kitchen. Despite the boxes in the dining room, the kitchen showed no signs of packing. The cabinets appeared full, dishes were stacked in the drying rack, and a coffee mug sat half full on the counter. On the refrigerator door, held by a magnet, was a photograph that caught my attention. Ray with his arm around a woman with long blonde hair. They were smiling at the camera, standing in front of this very house. The photo looked recent, but something about it struck me as odd. It had been torn slightly at one edge and then carefully taped back together. "Is this your house?" I asked, immediately regretting the question. It wasn't my business. Ray stood up abruptly. It was my parents. They left it to me and my sister. His tone was flat. Water lines disconnected. You said your brother's coming to help? Yeah, he should be here any. My phone chimed with a text message. I glanced at it. An automated alert about my credit card bill, not the fictional brother, but used it as an opportunity. That's him. He's outside. Ray nodded, seeming distracted now. There's a side door through the mudroom. Easier to get the fridge out that way. He led me through a narrow mudroom filled with more boxes. I noticed a baseball bat leaning against the wall near the side door, and next to it, a large toolbox. As Ray reached for the door handle, I caught a glimpse of what looked like dark stains on the concrete floor near the threshold. My mind immediately registered it as oil or some other mechanical fluid, but a nagging voice in my head whispered otherwise. I helped Ray maneuver the refrigerator onto my dolly, and we wheeled it out to my rented truck without incident. Throughout the process, Ray remained distracted, frequently glancing back at the house as if expecting someone to appear. Once we had loaded the appliance, I handed him the cash. "Thanks," he said, stuffing the envelope into his pocket without counting it. "Good luck with it." I was about to leave when curiosity got the better of me. "So where are you moving to?" Ray seemed startled by the question. "Florida," he said after a pause. "Job opportunity." I nodded, even though his answer felt rehearsed. "Well, good luck with the move." As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw Ray still standing in the driveway, watching my truck disappear down the street. Something about the entire interaction left me unsettled, but I chalked it up to Ray's obvious stress about moving. People act strange when their lives are in transition. The refrigerator worked perfectly in my kitchen. Over the next few days, I became absorbed in other house projects. Patching walls, painting the living room, replacing light fixtures. I'd almost forgotten about the odd encounter until 5 days later, when I was scrolling through Facebook during my lunch break at work. A local news page had posted an article that caught my attention. Police seek information on missing St. Paul woman. The accompanying photo made my blood run cold. It was the blonde woman from the photograph on Ray's refrigerator. According to the article, Catherine Mercer, 34, hadn't been seen for nearly 2 weeks. She was last known to be at the Portland Avenue home she shared with her brother, Raymond Mercer. Colleagues became concerned when she didn't show up for work at her accounting firm and didn't respond to calls or texts. I felt a cold sweat braid across my forehead as I read further. The police had conducted a welfare check, but found no sign of Catherine at the residence. Her brother had reportedly told officers that she had left for a vacation but couldn't provide details about her destination or when she was expected to return. Her car was still parked in the garage. The article mentioned that Raymond Mercer was cooperating with the investigation, but that police were concerned by certain inconsistencies in his statements. They were asking anyone with information about Catherine's whereabouts or recent activities to come forward. I stared at my phone, my lunch forgotten, the refrigerator, the hasty move, the stains on the floor, Ray's nervous behavior, the photograph torn and taped back together. It could all have innocent explanations, but taken together with this news article, my mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. I needed to tell someone, but what exactly would I say? That I bought a refrigerator from a guy who seemed weird? That I saw some stains that might have been nothing? I had no proof of anything suspicious. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I decided to call the non-emergency police line listed in the article, just to share what I knew. Maybe it was nothing, but if Catherine Mercer was in danger, or worse, I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent. I made the call that afternoon, speaking with the detective Elisa Ramirez. I explained how I'd purchased the refrigerator, described Ray's demeanor, the state of the house, and mentioned the photograph and the stains I'd seen. "And you said this was 5 days ago?" Detective Ramirez asked, her tone sharpening with interest. "Yes, last Thursday at 2 p.m. "Did Raymond Mercer mention where he was moving to?" "He said Florida, for a job opportunity, but he seemed hesitant when I asked." "And the refrigerator, it was in good condition? Clean?" "Very clean, almost like it had been sanitized." There was a pause on her end. "Mr. Cooper, would you be willing to come to the station to give a formal statement? This could be important information for our investigation." My stomach tightened. "Of course, I want to help." "One more thing," she added. "The refrigerator is now in your possession, correct? We may need to send someone to examine it." The implications of her words hit me like a physical blow. I was now sleeping 30 feet away from an appliance that the police believed might contain evidence related to a potential crime. I agreed to the detective's requests, feeling as if I had somehow been pulled into the undertow of something dark and dangerous. 2 hours later, I sat in an interview room at the St. Paul Police Department, recounting my story in greater detail. Detective Ramirez was a compact woman with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She asked precise questions, often circling back to specific details: the exact time I arrived at the house, Ray's physical appearance, his specific words. "You mentioned he was trembling," she noted. "Could that have been from exertion? Moving the refrigerator?" "No, I noticed it before we touched the appliance. When he was showing me around, his hands were shaking." She nodded, making a note. "And you're certain the photograph on the refrigerator showed Catherine Mercer?" It was definitely the same woman from the news article. They were standing in front of the house together. After I finished my statement, Detective Ramirez explained that they would send forensic technicians to my house to examine the refrigerator. "We'll be discreet," she assured me. "We don't want to alarm your neighbors." As I was leaving, she added, "Mr. Cooper, I'd advise you not to discuss this with anyone for now. And if Raymond Mercer contacts you for any reason, please let us know immediately." The gravity of the situation settled over me as I drove home. What had I brought into my house? What had I witnessed without realizing it? The questions churned in my mind, along with images of Ray's trembling hands and those dark stains on the mudroom floor. That evening, I couldn't help myself. I put on gloves and examined the refrigerator more carefully. I found nothing unusual until I pulled it away from the wall to check the back. There, caught in the cooling coils, was a small gold earring. My breath caught in my throat as I remembered the photo on Ray's refrigerator. Catherine had been wearing similar earrings. I carefully placed it in a plastic bag and called Detective Ramirez immediately. The forensic team arrived at my house the next morning, 2 technicians in unmarked vehicles who worked methodically, photographing and swabbing various parts of the refrigerator. They paid particular attention to the cooling coils, where I'd found the earring, and the drainage pan underneath the appliance. One of the technicians, a woman with prematurely gray hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, maintained a professional detachment throughout the process. The other, a younger man with a neat beard, occasionally glanced at me with what seemed like sympathy. "How long will this take?" I asked as they worked. "We'll be done soon," the woman replied, "but we may need to take the refrigerator with us." "Take it? I just bought it," I protested, then immediately felt ashamed. If Catherine Mercer was dead, my inconvenience was trivial. The technician nodded. "We'll know shortly if that's necessary." After they finished the initial examination, they conferred quietly in my kitchen. The woman made a phone call, speaking in low tones. When she hung up, she turned to me. "We need to take the refrigerator for further analysis." The department will provide compensation for your purchase. My stomach dropped. You found something. She maintained her professional demeanor. I can't discuss the details of an ongoing investigation. Detective Ramirez will be in touch. As they prepared to remove the refrigerator, my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered to hear Ray Mercer's voice, and my blood ran cold. Hey Alex, how's the fridge working out? I struggled to keep my voice casual. It's fine. Working great. Good. He paused. Listen, I realized I might have left something important inside it before I sold it to you. A small envelope taped to the back wall of the freezer. Did you happen to find anything like that? The technicians had frozen in place, watching me. The woman mouthed speaker, and I switched the call to speakerphone. No, I haven't found anything, I said, my heart pounding. I haven't looked that carefully, though. Mind checking now while I'm on the phone? It's really important. Family documents. The technicians were furiously typing on their phones, presumably alerting Detective Ramirez. Actually, I'm not at home right now, I lied. I can check when I get back and let you know. Where are you? The question came too quickly, too sharply. At work. I won't be home until evening. There was a long pause. That's fine. I'll check back later. His tone had changed, becoming colder. By the way, has anyone else been asking about me or Catherine? The female technician shook her head vigorously. No, why would they? I managed to say. No reason. People talk, that's all. Another pause. I'll call back tonight. After he hung up, the technicians immediately made calls of their own. Within minutes, Detective Ramirez arrived with 2 uniformed officers. He knows we're investigating, she said without preamble. We need to move quickly. Mr. Cooper, for your safety, we'd like you to stay somewhere else tonight. He's coming here, isn't he? I asked, the reality sinking in. We believe that's a possibility. We'll have officers watching your house, but it would be better if you weren't here. As the technicians finished removing my refrigerator, evidence in what was clearly now a murder investigation, Detective Ramirez explained that they had already been building a case against Raymond Mercer. Catherine's blood had been found in the mudroom of the Portland Avenue house, despite attempts to clean it. Financial records showed Ray had recently emptied his sister's accounts using forged signatures. We believe he killed her approximately 2 weeks ago, following an argument about the house they'd inherited, she explained. Catherine wanted to sell it and split the proceeds. Ray wanted to keep it, but couldn't afford to buy her out. And the refrigerator? I asked, dreading the answer. Detective Ramirez's expression remained professional, but her eyes betrayed a hint of the horror she'd seen in her career. We believe it may have been used to temporarily store evidence. The earring you found belongs to Catherine Mercer. We're also analyzing trace evidence found in the drainage pan. I felt sick as the implications became clear. He was getting rid of it because it could connect him to his sister's disappearance. Yes, he likely cleaned it thoroughly but missed some evidence. I packed an overnight bag and checked into a hotel under the department's guidance. That night, the news reported that Raymond Mercer had been arrested while attempting to break into a residence in northeast Minneapolis, my house. A search of his vehicle had uncovered a gun, duct tape, and a shovel. In the days that followed, the case against Ray Mercer grew stronger. Police found Catherine's remains buried in a wooded area near Stillwater, about 30 minutes east of St. Paul. Forensic evidence from the refrigerator, microscopic blood traces in the drainage system that had survived Ray's cleaning, provided crucial evidence linking him to the crime. I was called to testify at the grand jury hearing, recounting my interaction with Ray and the purchase of the refrigerator. The prosecutor, a stern woman with immaculate posture, emphasized the importance of my observation about Ray's demeanor and the condition of the house. "Your awareness may have helped solve this case," she told me afterward. "Many people would have ignored their instincts. But I couldn't take comfort in that. I kept thinking about Catherine Mercer, about the photograph on the refrigerator, about how ordinary the day had seemed when I drove to Portland Avenue looking for a bargain. The randomness of it haunted me. If I hadn't needed a refrigerator, if I hadn't seen that particular listing, if Ray had sold it to someone less observant or less willing to come forward. Detective Ramirez kept me updated on the case as it progressed. Ray had confessed after confronting the evidence against him, revealing that he and Catherine had argued over the house they'd inherited. The argument escalated, and he struck her with the baseball bat I had seen in the mudroom. Panicked, he had hidden her body in the refrigerator temporarily before burying her remains. He was planning to flee the country, Ramirez told me. The cash he was collecting from selling items like the refrigerator was meant to fund his escape. I received a replacement refrigerator through the victim compensation program, but I couldn't bring myself to use it. Every time I looked at it, I imagined Catherine Mercer's final moments. Eventually, I sold the house in Northeast and moved to a different neighborhood, needing a fresh start away from the shadows that now filled those rooms. Raymond Mercer's trial began 8 months later. I attended every day, feeling a strange responsibility to witness justice for a woman I had never met, but whose death had become intertwined with my life. Catherine's friends and colleagues testified about her kindness, her ambition, her plans for the future, all extinguished by her brother's greed and rage. The prosecution built a methodical case, presenting forensic evidence, financial records, and testimony from neighbors who had heard arguing from the Portland Avenue house the night Catherine disappeared. When it was my turn to testify, I recounted every detail of my interaction with Ray, from the Facebook listing to his call after I'd contacted the police. Ray sat impassively throughout most of the trial, but when I testified about finding the earring in the refrigerator coils, he visibly flinched. Our eyes met briefly across the courtroom, and I saw something terrible in his gaze. Not remorse, but anger, that he had been caught by such a small oversight. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict for first-degree murder. Ray was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led from the courtroom, he looked back at me one last time, his expression unreadable. Catherine Mercer's parents approached me after the sentencing, their faces etched with grief that would never fully heal. "Thank you for coming forward," Catherine's mother said, clasping my hand in both of hers. "You helped bring our daughter home." I nodded, unable to find adequate words. What comfort could I possibly offer to parents who had lost their daughter, and in a way, their son as well? In the aftermath of the trial, I found myself changed in subtle but permanent ways. I became more cautious in my interactions, more aware of the potential darkness hiding behind ordinary transactions. My bargain hunting hobby, once a source of pleasure, now filled me with anxiety. I deleted my Facebook account entirely, unable to look at marketplace listings without thinking of Catherine Mercer's torn photograph. 3 years have passed since that day I drove to Portland Avenue, looking for a refrigerator. I've moved again, this time to a different city, seeking distance from the memories. I now work with a nonprofit that advocates for victims of domestic violence. A career change inspired by what happened. It doesn't erase the nightmares, but it gives them purpose. Sometimes I still catch myself analyzing the behavior of strangers, looking for signs of something amiss, trembling hands, inconsistent stories, nervous glances. I can't help but wonder how many crimes are hiding in plain sight, behind ordinary interactions and everyday transactions. Last month, I received a letter from Detective Ramirez, who has since been promoted to sergeant. She wrote to inform me that Raymond Mercer had died in prison. An aneurysm, sudden and unexpected. The case was officially closed. I should have felt relief, perhaps even a sense of justice completed. Instead, I found myself thinking about that moment in Ray's kitchen, when I first noticed the photograph on the refrigerator. How normal everything seemed, how casually the horror was concealed behind the veneer of an ordinary day. The most terrifying realization wasn't that I had brushed against a murderer or brought evidence of his crime into my home. It was the understanding that such darkness exists alongside us all the time, separated only by the thinnest of membranes. A chance encounter, an overlooked detail, a seemingly innocuous transaction on Facebook Marketplace. I don't use online marketplaces anymore. I pay retail prices for new appliances with warranties and delivery services. I've lost interest in the thrill of the bargain, the satisfaction of the deal. Some prices are too high, even when they seem like a steal. Every night before bed, I check the locks on my doors and windows twice. I keep my phone charged and within reach. These rituals don't make me feel completely safe. I'm not sure I ever will again. But they remind me to stay vigilant, to trust my instincts. Because the most haunting aspect of what happened isn't that monsters exist in the world. It's that they list their refrigerators for sale online. They shake your hand with trembling fingers. They stand in driveways watching you drive away. They look like ordinary people having a bad day. And sometimes they have your address. I never paid much attention to the faces in the subway before that night. They were just a blur of humanity. Tired commuters, tourists consulting maps, teenagers with headphones. The Clinton, Washington station on the G line had been my daily gateway between work and home for 3 years. Its grimy tiles and flickering lights as familiar as my own apartment. That Tuesday in November had been unremarkable. I'd stayed late at the office, finishing quarterly reports, while the rest of my team had gone home. The clock read 11:23 p.m. when I finally descended the stairs into the station. The platform was nearly deserted. Just me and a handful of night shift workers or late-night revelers scattered along its length. I remember checking my phone, scrolling mindlessly through social media updates. The platform's distinctive smell of brake dust, electricity, and something vaguely organic filled my nostrils. A smell I'd grown so accustomed to that I only noticed it when I returned from vacation. The rumble of a distant train vibrated through the concrete beneath my feet, promising arrival in 2 minutes, according to the electronic board overhead. That's when I first noticed him. A middle-aged man in a gray overcoat standing perfectly still at the far end of the platform. Something about his posture made me glance twice. While everyone else shifted their weight or checked phones, he remained motionless, staring directly at the tunnel where the train would emerge. The train arrived exactly on schedule, its headlights sweeping the station before it screeched to a halt. Doors opened with their familiar hydraulic sigh. I boarded the second-to-last car, mostly empty except for an elderly woman with grocery bags and a young couple immersed in conversation. I settled into a seat facing the platform, my reflection ghosting against the dark tunnel beyond. As we pulled away, I noticed the man in the gray coat hadn't boarded. He remained in the same position, still staring into the now empty tunnel. The subway car rocked gently as it accelerated, the rhythm almost hypnotic as fluorescent lights flickered overhead. 3 stops later, the elderly woman disembarked. 1 stop after that, the couple left, laughing about something I couldn't hear. I was alone in the car. Between stations, in that peculiar silence broken only by the clatter of wheels on tracks, I felt a strange sensation. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. I pulled my jacket tighter and glanced around the empty car. Nothing had changed, yet something felt different, as if the air had thickened, becoming more substantial around me. The digital display indicated 4 more stops until mine. I checked my phone again, but the signal had disappeared, showing only the time, 11:47 p.m. The train slowed as it approached Bergen Street Station. The platform came into view, empty, save for a solitary figure standing in exactly the same position as the man at Clinton, Washington. Same gray overcoat, same stillness, same intense stare directed at the approaching train. I blinked, convinced I was seeing things. As the train stopped and the doors opened, I leaned forward, straining to get a better look. The man didn't move, didn't board. The doors closed and we pulled away. I pressed my face against the window, watching until he disappeared from view. Coincidence, I told myself. Just someone who looked similar. But unease had taken root inside me. At Carroll Street, it happened again. A man in a gray overcoat, standing motionless at the exact same spot on the platform. This time, I stood up and moved closer to the doors. I could see his face more clearly, expressionless, pale eyes fixed on the train. Not just similar to the previous men, identical. My heart pounded as the doors closed and we moved on. I pulled out my phone to call someone, anyone, but still no signal. The car's lights flickered more intensely now, dimming for uncomfortable seconds before brightening again. I was no longer alone in the car. A woman had appeared in the seat diagonally across from me, though I hadn't seen her board. She wore headphones, her head bobbing slightly to music I couldn't hear. "Excuse me," I called out. She didn't respond. I called louder, but she remained oblivious to my presence. The train began to slow between stations. No announcement came over the speakers, just the gradual decrease in speed until we stopped completely in the tunnel. The lights dimmed again, longer this time, before stabilizing at half their normal brightness. The woman with headphones continued bobbing her head, unperturbed. I moved to tap her shoulder, but as my hand approached, she vanished. Not got up and walked away, vanished, like someone had switched off a projector. I stumbled back into my seat, breath coming in short gasps. The train remained motionless, suspended in the blackness of the tunnel. Minutes passed. 5, 10. No announcements, no movement. My phone now showed 12 a.m. exactly, but the time wasn't changing. The battery indicator showed full charge, yet the screen went black a moment later. A tap on the window beside me nearly stopped my heart. I turned to see a hand pressed against the glass from outside. A hand that shouldn't exist in the middle of a tunnel. Behind it, barely visible in the dim light reflecting off the glass, was the face of the man in the gray overcoat. I scrambled to the other side of the car. The hand remained pressed against the window for several seconds before slowly sliding out of view. The train lurched forward without warning, throwing me off balance. We were moving again, faster than normal, accelerating through the darkness. The lights flickered violently before going out completely, plunging me into absolute darkness. When the lights returned, I wasn't alone. The car was filled with passengers, dozens of them, all wearing identical gray overcoats. They sat and stood in perfect stillness, faces forward, none acknowledging my presence or each other's. I pushed my way toward the door, connecting to the next car, mumbling apologies that received no response. The passengers didn't move to let me pass. I had to physically squeeze between them. Their bodies felt cold through their coats. The door to the next car was locked. I pounded on it, shouting for help, but my voice sounded muffled, as if the air itself was absorbing the sound. When I turned back, all the passengers were facing me, their expressions identical, not threatening, not angry, just observing. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. No one answered, but the passenger nearest to me slowly raised his arm and pointed toward the window. Outside, instead of the black tunnel walls, I saw another train passing in the opposite direction. In its windows I could see passengers, normal, varied people in different clothes, looking at phones, talking, dozing. And in one window, a terrified face I recognized immediately as my own. The impossible view outside the window shifted as our train emerged from the tunnel into a station I didn't recognize. The signage was backwards, the platform empty. The doors opened, but none of the gray-coated passengers moved. "Is this where I get off?" I asked, not expecting an answer. The nearest passenger nodded, almost imperceptibly. I stepped onto the platform. The air felt different, heavier, older somehow. The train doors closed behind me, and it pulled away, carrying its silent passengers into the tunnel. I was alone in the unfamiliar station. The digital display boards were blank. No transit maps on the walls. Just endless tiled walls curving into darkness in both directions. A distant sound caught my attention. The faint rumble of an approaching train from the opposite track. Relief washed over me. Whatever strange detour I'd taken, surely this next train would return me to the normal world. As the train approached, I moved to the edge of the platform. The sound grew louder, but no headlights appeared in the tunnel. Still, the rumbling came closer, the platform vibrating beneath my feet. Something emerged from the darkness. Not a train, but a mass of shifting shadows, formless yet substantial, rushing toward the platform at incredible speed. I stumbled backward as it roared past, stirring a wind that smelled of electricity and decay. In that rush of air I heard voices, thousands of them, whispering words I couldn't quite catch. Names, perhaps, dates, fragments of conversations. The collective murmurs of everyone who had ever passed through these tunnels, their words and thoughts lingering in the darkness beneath the city. The shadow train passed, leaving behind a profound silence and a sense of finality I couldn't explain. At the far end of the platform, a single exit sign glowed red above a staircase. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step taking me further from the underground world I'd glimpsed. At the top was a turnstile, and beyond it the familiar entrance to Clinton, Washington Station. Outside, dawn was breaking over Brooklyn. My phone buzzed in my pocket, full signal now, the time reading 5:17 a.m. 6 missed calls from my roommate, worried when I hadn't come home. I've taken buses ever since. Some nights I still wake up hearing the whispers from that shadow train, feeling the weight of countless unseen eyes. Some nights I wonder if I ever actually left the tunnels at all, or if what I think is my life now is just an elaborate illusion created by whatever lives in the darkness beneath the city. A story playing out while my true self rides endless loops on a ghost train, surrounded by silent men in gray overcoats, my reflection passing itself in the night. Maybe you've seen it too. Your own face flashing past in a subway window, trapped in a world parallel to this one. If you do, don't meet its eyes. Don't acknowledge the recognition. Just look away and pray the train keeps moving. It was the kind of late autumn evening where darkness falls too quickly, making 6 p.m. feel like midnight. The steady drizzle had been falling all day, not heavy enough to warrant an umbrella, but persistent enough to soak through my jacket as I hurried through the Walmart parking lot. My cartwheels squeaked rhythmically across the wet asphalt, joining the symphony of car doors slamming and shopping carts being corralled back into their metal homes. I hadn't meant to be out this late. My evening routine was typically predictable. Finish work at my remote accounting job by 5, maybe go for a quick jog, then make dinner while listening to a podcast. But today, my refrigerator had decided to issue an ultimatum in the form of nearly empty shelves, and the last apple in my fruit bowl had developed an unsettling soft spot. A grocery run couldn't be postponed any longer. The fluorescent-lit aisles of Walmart had been mercifully quiet for a Tuesday evening. I'd gathered more than I'd planned. Doesn't everyone? And was now struggling to arrange the paper bags in my trunk so they wouldn't topple over during the 15-minute drive back to my apartment complex on the outskirts of Burlington. That's when I noticed him. He was standing just beyond the yellow glow of the parking lot lights. A tall figure with slumped shoulders, one hand raised half-heartedly. In the dim light, I could make out jeans, a dark jacket that appeared too thin for the weather, and what seemed to be a small duffel bag at his feet. A hitchhiker. I'd driven past dozens of hitchhikers in my life. Growing up in Vermont, it wasn't uncommon to see people thumbing rides along rural roads. My parents had drilled the standard warnings into my head. Never pick up strangers, especially if you're alone. It was one of those universal rules that everyone knew and most people followed. But tonight, maybe it was the rain, maybe it was the exhaustion in his posture, something made me hesitate as I closed my trunk and walked around to the driver's side. The temperature had dropped into the low 40s, and the drizzle was turning into a more determined downpour. The forecast had mentioned possible freezing rain by midnight. As I started my car, my headlights swept across him, illuminating him fully for the first time. He was younger than I'd initially thought, probably mid-20s, not much different from my own 32 years. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead from the rain, and he squinted against my headlights. He didn't look threatening, just tired and thoroughly soaked. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was remembering how my brother once got stranded miles from home when his car broke down during a snowstorm. Maybe it was simply the basic human instinct to help someone in need. Whatever the reason, I found myself rolling down my passenger window as I approached the exit. "Where are you headed?" I called out, already feeling the rain spatter through the open window onto my passenger seat. The man jogged over, bending down to peer into my car. Raindrops cascaded from his hair and jacket. "Just trying to get to Winooski," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "My car broke down about 3 miles back. I'd really appreciate a ride if you're heading that way." Winooski was on my route home, just before Burlington. It would require no detour. "Throw your bag in the back," I said, immediately second-guessing myself, even as the words left my mouth. He smiled, a quick, relieved flash of teeth, and opened the rear door to toss his duffel bag inside before sliding into the passenger seat. The interior light illuminated him briefly. Pale skin, dark eyes, a thin face with several days' worth of stubble. His clothes were decent quality, but rumpled, like he'd been wearing them for too long. "Thanks, man. Seriously," he said, rubbing his hands together for warmth. I was starting to think I'd have to walk the whole way. "No problem," I replied, though my heart rate had increased slightly. I pulled out of the parking lot, the windshield wipers working overtime against the increasingly heavy rain. "I'm Jacob, by the way." "Mike," he said, extending a damp hand, which I shook briefly. His grip was firm but clammy from the rain. An awkward silence followed as we merged onto the main road. I turned the heat up, partly for him and partly because the air suddenly felt too thick, too close. The rational part of my brain was cataloging all the warnings I'd ignored. Stranger in my car, nighttime, remote roads ahead. "So what happened to your car?" I asked, keeping my voice casual while my right hand instinctively checked that my phone was still in my pocket. "It was. Small comfort. Alternator, I think," Mike said with a sigh. "It's an old Civic. Been giving me trouble for months. Started making this weird whining noise, then the battery light came on, and then nothing. Dead on the shoulder about 3 miles back." It sounded plausible enough. My limited knowledge of cars told me that alternator failures often presented exactly that way. That's rough, I said. You call a tow? Yeah, he nodded. But they said it'd be a couple hours with the weather. Couldn't afford to wait out there. And my phone's almost dead. No charger in the car. Another plausible detail. The wipers swished hypnotically across the windshield as we left the more populated commercial area behind. The road ahead was darker now, bordered by dense trees that seemed to absorb what little light the street lamps provided. You live in Winooski? I asked, trying to maintain conversation to ease my own nerves. Just moved there last month, he replied. Got a job at the brewery. You know the one by the river? I did know it. A popular local craft brewery. Another point in the "this guy is probably normal" column. Yeah, I've been there a few times. Good beer. Mike nodded enthusiastically. Best sour IPA I've ever had. I work in production. Not exciting, but pays the bills. As we chatted about local beers and the changing Vermont seasons, I felt myself relaxing slightly. The conversation flowed easily enough, and Mike seemed genuine. 20 minutes, I told myself. 20 minutes and he'd be out of my car. Yet something kept nagging at me, a subtle wrongness I couldn't quite place. It wasn't until we were about halfway to Winooski that I began noticing the inconsistencies. Small things at first, the kind you might dismiss individually, but that collectively raise silent alarms. Mike had mentioned moving to Winooski last month for the brewery job, but when I asked which apartment complex he lived in, he hesitated just a beat too long before naming one I knew well. Riverside Heights? Nice place, I commented. My friend lived there last year. Which building are you in? Building C, he said, looking out the window at the passing trees. Still getting used to the layout, honestly. What he didn't know was that Riverside Heights had buildings labeled A, B, D, and E. There was no building C, an odd architectural quirk my friend had joked about during her lease there. I kept my expression neutral, continuing the conversation while mentally flagging the discrepancy. Maybe he had simply misspoken or misremembered his building letter. It happened. But then came another odd moment. As we passed a police car parked on the shoulder monitoring traffic, Mike subtly slouched lower in his seat, his body language instantly changing. It wasn't the casual reaction of someone who worries about being a few miles per hour over the speed limit. It was the instinctive duck of someone who doesn't want to be seen. Everything okay? I asked, keeping my tone light. Yeah, just tired, he said, straightening back up, but still glancing in the side mirror until the police car was well behind us. The rain had intensified, drumming on the roof of my car with an urgency that matched my increasing heart rate. The windshield wipers couldn't quite keep up, making the road ahead a blurry tunnel of refracted headlights and shadows. I still had my phone in my pocket, but what would I say if I called someone? That I'd picked up a hitchhiker who seemed weird? That wasn't exactly 911 worthy. So how long have you been at the brewery? I asked, keeping my voice steady. About 6 months, he replied. I frowned slightly. I thought you said you moved here last month? A pause, brief but noticeable. Right, sorry. I was commuting at first from St. Albans. Moved closer once I knew the job was working out. A reasonable explanation, yet his hand had moved to his jacket pocket, staying there. The gesture reminded me of how I was keeping my own hand near my phone. We were now on a particularly dark stretch of road. The next town was still about 7 minutes away, and the houses along this section were few and far between, set back from the road behind screens of trees. Mind if I play some music? I asked, reaching for the radio before he could answer. Actually, Mike said, his voice suddenly firmer, I'd rather you didn't. I've got a killer headache from being in the rain. I nodded and withdrew my hand from the radio. It was a reasonable request, But something in his tone had changed. The friendly, grateful hitchhiker was slipping, revealing edges of something harder beneath. That's when I noticed the third thing, the most concerning yet. As he had reached up to rub his temple, his jacket had shifted slightly, revealing what looked like a dark leather holster beneath his left arm. My mouth went dry. Was that a gun harness? My eyes flicked back to the road quickly, not wanting him to notice my observation. It could be something else. A phone holster, maybe? Did people even use those anymore? So, I said, my voice coming out a bit higher than I intended. What do you do at the brewery exactly? Give tours? Work the bar? Production, he said shortly. I already told you that. Indeed he had. I was starting to lose track of our conversation, my mind racing ahead to possibilities I didn't want to contemplate. 4 miles to Winooski. The GPS on my dashboard counted down the distance in glowing blue numbers that seemed to decrease too slowly. The rain continued its assault, and the darkness outside the car felt absolute now, broken only by occasional oncoming headlights that momentarily flooded the interior with harsh light. During one such passing car, I caught Mike studying me with an intensity that hadn't been there before. His earlier easy demeanor had evaporated, replaced by a coiled alertness that set off every internal warning system I possessed. You said you lived just past Winooski? He asked, breaking the silence that had stretched uncomfortably long. Yeah, I replied, deliberately vague. Small apartment complex just outside Burlington. He nodded slowly. Must be nice, having your own place. Rent's crazy these days. Tell me about it, I agreed, trying to keep my voice casual while my thoughts raced. Where exactly in Winooski should I drop you? The brewery? Nah, not tonight, he said. Just drop me at the corner of Main and River. I can walk from there. Main and River. It was a central intersection, busy during the day but likely quiet at this hour, especially in this weather. Not necessarily a residential area. Why wouldn't he want to be dropped directly at his apartment, given the downpour? You sure? I don't mind taking you all the way home in this rain. Something flickered across his face. Annoyance? Concern? Corner's fine, he said firmly. We were 3 miles out now. The road had widened slightly as we approached the more populated area, but traffic remained sparse. A gas station appeared on the right, its bright fluorescent lights a beacon in the darkness. Mind if I stop for gas? I asked suddenly, already slowing down and signaling. It wasn't a complete lie. My tank was around quarter full. Mike's response was immediate. Can it wait? I'm already running late. Late for what? He hadn't mentioned any plans or expectations. It'll just take a minute, I insisted, already turning into the gas station. Better safe than sorry with the weather getting worse. As I pulled up to a pump, I could feel the tension radiating from Mike. He was sitting straighter now, his right hand still in his jacket pocket. Was he gripping something there? I'll be quick, I said, killing the engine and taking my keys. I deliberately left the headlights on, illuminating the area around us. Do you want anything from inside? Coffee? Water? No, he said tersely. Then, seeming to catch himself, he added with a forced smile, actually, coffee would be great. Black. I nodded and stepped out into the rain, locking the car with the remote as I walked away. A reflex action I immediately questioned. If he was dangerous, was I safer with him locked inside my car or outside where he could potentially follow me? The gas station attendant looked up briefly as I entered, then returned to his phone. There were no other customers inside. I walked directly to the counter rather than to the coffee station. Hey, I said quietly, leaning in slightly. I picked up a hitchhiker and I'm getting some weird vibes. Could you call the police? The attendant, a young guy with a name tag reading Tyler, looked up with sudden interest, glancing past me toward the parking lot. What kind of weird vibes? I think he might have a gun, I said, the words sounding dramatic once spoken aloud. He's been lying about where he lives, and I saw what looked like a holster under his jacket. Tyler's eyes widened. Shit, man. Yeah, I'll call. You want to wait in here? I glanced back toward my car. Mike was watching the store entrance intently. If I didn't return with coffee, he'd know something was wrong. I should go back out, I said. If I stay in here, he might get suspicious and take off. Can you just call and report a suspicious person? Maybe have an officer drive by? Tyler nodded. Be careful, man. I quickly paid for gas I didn't need and got 2 coffees, my hands shaking slightly as I fitted the lids. As I pushed the door open to head back outside, I heard Tyler speaking quietly into his phone behind me. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, but the night air felt colder than before. Mike's face was illuminated by the blue glow of my phone screen as I approached. He had my phone in his hand. My stomach dropped. I'd left it in the cup holder. Looking for this? Mike held up my phone, his expression unreadable in the dim light. It was ringing. I set the coffees on the roof of the car and extended my hand, forcing steadiness into my voice. Thanks. Who was it? Didn't check, he said, handing it back. Not my business. I took the phone, noting that the screen was indeed on the incoming call page. A missed call from Mom. The timestamp showed it had ended just seconds ago. Had my mother actually called at this exact moment, or had Mike been looking through my phone and exited to the call screen when he saw me coming? Thanks for the coffee, he said as I unlocked the car and handed him the cup. His tone had shifted again, back to the affable hitchhiker from earlier. The change was jarring. I walked around to the driver's side, started the engine, and pretended to check my phone before putting it in my pocket. No emergency texts from my mother. Just coincidental timing then. As I pulled back onto the main road, Mike sipped his coffee quietly. The gas station receded in my rearview mirror, along with my one point of contact with the outside world. We were less than 10 minutes from Winooski now. I could make it. Drop him off and drive away. So how long have you lived around here? Mike asked, as if sensing my discomfort and attempting to ease it. About 5 years, I replied, keeping my answers short now. You like it? I'm still getting used to Vermont winters. Where did you move from? I asked, suddenly realizing he'd never mentioned this. A slight pause. Colorado, Denver area. Never been, I said. Heard it's beautiful though. It is, he agreed, looking out the window. Different kind of beautiful than here, more dramatic. Vermont's more subtle. We fell into silence again as the outskirts of Winooski appeared ahead. Streetlights became more frequent, houses closer together. Signs of civilization that should have been comforting, but somehow weren't. You can let me out at the next light, Mike said suddenly. We were still about half a mile from Main and River. I nodded, relief washing over me, and began to slow down. But as I approached the intersection, Mike spoke again, his voice different now, lower, more deliberate. Actually, I think we should keep driving for a bit. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I thought you wanted Winooski. Change of plans, he said. His right hand had returned to his jacket pocket. Take the next right. The next right led away from town, back toward more isolated roads. Everything in me screamed not to comply. My turn is coming up straight ahead. Take the right. Each word was distinct, hard-edged. I approached the turn, my mind racing through options. If he had a gun, refusing could be fatal. But turning would take us away from witnesses, from safety. As I slowed at the intersection, red brake lights suddenly flared ahead. A police cruiser, parked just beyond the turn Mike wanted me to take. In that moment, I made my decision. Instead of turning right, I pulled directly behind the police car and stopped. What the? Mike began, panic rising in his voice. I can't go that way, I said quickly. I think that's where my alternator gave out last year. It was a ridiculous excuse, but I was already opening my door. I'm just going to ask the officer for directions to a better route. Doubt. Mike started, but I was already out of the car, rain be damned. The officer had noticed the car pulling up behind him and was already opening his door. I approached with my hands clearly visible. "Officer," I called, "can I speak with you for a moment?" I didn't look back at my car, but I could feel Mike's eyes boring into my back. What would he do? Run? Stay? If he had a weapon, would he use it? The officer, a stocky man in his 40s, stepped out. "Everything okay, sir?" "I'm not sure," I said quietly as I got closer. "I picked up a hitchhiker and something feels off. I think he might be armed." The officer's posture changed immediately, becoming more alert. He put his hand on his holster and looked past me toward my car. "Stay here," he instructed, and began walking toward my vehicle, calling for backup on his radio. What happened next occurred in a blur of motion. As the officer approached, Mike suddenly bolted from the passenger side, leaving the door flung open. Instead of running away, however, he circled around the front of my car and lunged toward me. "You shouldn't have done that," he hissed, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. I saw then what he had been keeping in his pocket. Not a gun, but a knife, its blade catching the reflection of the streetlight. The officer shouted commands that Mike ignored. In the moment of frozen terror that followed, I noticed something fall from Mike's pocket. A small leather wallet that flipped open as it hit the wet pavement. From it, a badge gleamed. Not police, something else. Federal. The officer saw it too. His approach faltered. "FBI, what the hell?" Mike froze, the knife still gripped in his hand, but his attention now divided between me and the local officer. The moment of confusion was enough for the officer to draw his weapon. "Drop the knife! Now!" Mike's grip on my arm tightened, then released. The knife clattered to the ground. The next hour passed in a surreal haze. More officers arrived. Mike, whose real name it turned out was not Mike, was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police cruiser. But not before a flurry of tense phone calls were made from the scene. I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket around my shoulders that seemed unnecessary, until I realized I was shaking uncontrollably. An officer took my statement, his expression growing increasingly grim as I recounted the events of the evening. "You're lucky," he said when I finished. "Very lucky." "Who is he?" I asked. The officer hesitated. "We're still confirming his identity, but he's definitely not FBI. The badge is fake. Good quality, but fake." A detective approached then, a tall woman with short gray hair who introduced herself as Detective Mercer. "Mr. Collins," she said, using my last name, though I didn't remember giving it, "we need to ask you a few more questions." She led me to her unmarked car, out of the rain and away from the cluster of emergency vehicles. Once inside, she turned to face me. "The man you picked up goes by several names. We believe his real name is Patrick Lerner. Does that name mean anything to you?" I shook my head. "He's wanted in connection with 4 disappearances across 3 states, she continued. All individuals who were reported to have given him rides. My blood ran cold. "Disappearances?" 2 bodies have been recovered so far, she said, her voice professionally detached but her eyes watchful. Both were found in remote wooded areas, several miles from major roads. The implication was clear. Had I turned right when he asked, I might have become the 5th victim. "Why?" I managed to ask. "Why would he?" "We don't know his motivations yet," Detective Mercer said, "but we do know his pattern. He targets lone drivers, usually men, often in store parking lots during bad weather. He's quite charming initially, builds rapport, then he directs them to isolated areas." I thought about how easily I'd fallen for it. The seemingly stranded motorist, the casual conversation about local beer, the plausible story. How long had he been waiting in that parking lot? How many cars had passed him by before mine stopped? "What happens now?" I asked. "We'll need you to come to the station, give a formal statement. There will likely be further interviews as the investigation continues." She paused. "Your actions tonight potentially saved lives, Mr. Collins. If we hadn't caught him..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Later, as I sat in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the police station, giving my statement for what felt like the dozenth time, a thought kept circling through my mind. How thin the line was between an ordinary Tuesday and something unthinkable. One decision, stop for a stranger in the rain, had nearly led me down a path from which there might have been no return. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Did you get my call earlier? Just checking if you're still coming for dinner on Sunday." Such a normal message from the normal world I had nearly left behind. I texted back that I was, and that I had quite a story to tell her when I saw her. 3 months have passed since that rainy night. Winter has settled firmly over Vermont, transforming the landscape into crisp white expanses that sparkle under rare appearances of the sun. Life has largely returned to its predictable rhythms: work, exercise, podcasts, weekend visits with friends. But some things have changed permanently. Patrick Lerner's case has made regional headlines. The investigation revealed details that still give me nightmares. A rented storage unit containing personal effects believed to belong to his victims, a journal meticulously documenting his methodologies, wooded areas marked on maps where authorities are still searching for remains. I've been asked to testify at his trial, which is scheduled for next spring. My therapist, yes, I have one of those now, says it will be an important part of processing what happened. Right now, it just feels like extending the nightmare. I've developed new habits. I no longer shop after dark if I can avoid it. I've installed a dash cam in my car. I carry pepper spray on my keychain. Small precautions that probably wouldn't have saved me that night, but they help me sleep better. More significantly, I've changed how I evaluate my instincts. Looking back, I realized there were dozens of warning signs from the moment I saw him in the parking lot. Not just the obvious inconsistencies in his story, but subtle signals my subconscious registered before my conscious mind could process them. The way his eyes scanned my car as he approached, assessing rather than simply seeking shelter. How he positioned himself in the seat to maintain maximum mobility. The calculated way he built rapport. Detective Mercer told me that predators like Lerner count on social conditioning, our reluctance to appear rude or paranoid, our desire to be helpful, our tendency to dismiss small inconsistencies in favor of more comfortable explanations. They exploit our best qualities: empathy, compassion, the willingness to help a stranger on a rainy night. Last week, I drove past a young woman with a flat tire on a quiet stretch of road. I pulled over, but I stayed in my locked car and called roadside assistance for her instead of getting out to help. As I waited with her until the tow truck arrived, we chatted through my partially open window. She was a nursing student, heading home from a late clinical rotation. She thanked me repeatedly for stopping. "Most people just drive by," she said. I nodded but didn't mention why I had stopped, or why I remained behind the safety of my locked door. I didn't tell her about Patrick Lerner, or about the 4 people who had shown the same kindness I had, but never made it home. Instead, I simply said, it's important to look out for each other. And it is. But now I understand the delicate balance between compassion and caution, between helping a stranger and protecting yourself. It's a line I navigate differently now, weighted by the knowledge of how close I came to becoming a statistic, another name on a detective's list of the missing and murdered. Sometimes, when the rain falls heavily against my windows, I find myself thinking about alternate versions of that night. The version where I didn't stop at the gas station. The version where I turned right instead of pulling behind the police car. The version where no officer happened to be parked at that exact intersection at that exact moment. In those alternate realities, I'm not sitting here typing these words. In those versions, I'm another mystery for my family to agonize over. Another unsolved case in Detective Mercer's files. Instead, through blind luck and some instinct for self-preservation I didn't know I possessed, I'm here. Changed, certainly. More cautious, definitely. But alive to tell the story of the night I almost wasn't. The night I gave a ride to a stranger in the rain. I took the trip to clear my head. 3 days off. A rental car. A coastal motel that smelled faintly of salt and old wood. After a messy breakup and an even messier stretch at work, I needed somewhere quiet. Somewhere far. I found a small town in Northern California. It had a beach with smooth stones instead of sand, coffee shops that closed by 6 p.m., and not much else. Just what I was looking for. Every morning, I'd wake up early, before the sun crested the hills, grab a lukewarm coffee from the place next to the gas station, and take the winding path down to the beach. The walk was quiet, save for the crunch of gravel underfoot and the distant caw of gulls already circling above the tide. There were rarely more than 3 or 4 people out there. A couple of joggers with earbuds in, a man walking a beagle that always barked twice when it saw me, and sometimes an older woman perched on a driftwood log with a sketch pad, drawing the waves in delicate strokes. But on my 3rd morning, there was someone else. He stood out immediately. A man in his 40s, maybe older, wearing a faded navy windbreaker zipped all the way to his chin. He stood unnaturally still near the rocks, arms at his sides, eyes fixed on the ocean, or at least in that direction. His stance was too rigid, too deliberate, like he was waiting for something. As I walked past him, I slowed slightly, expecting a nod or some subtle acknowledgement. There was none. He didn't smile, didn't glance at me. Still I felt it, the weight of his gaze, not directly, but close. Watching, calculating. I quickened my pace, and even though I didn't look back, every instinct screamed that he had turned to follow my movement with his eyes. I started to notice him more, not just on the beach. One afternoon I saw him in town, leaning against a telephone pole across from the bookstore. Another time, he was at the grocery store, 2 aisles over, not buying anything, just browsing. He never spoke, never got close, but I always knew he was there. I told myself it was coincidence, that small towns had small boundaries, but my gut said otherwise. That Friday evening I decided to take a walk just before sunset. The beach was quiet, painted gold by the fading light. I brought my camera, hoping to catch some last shots of the water. When I turned around, I saw him again, far behind me, not walking, just standing at the path entrance, half hidden behind the brush. I started walking faster. He didn't follow, not yet. It was my last night in town. I was packing when I heard a knock, not on my motel door, on the sliding door facing the beach. I froze. The curtain was closed, but I could see the faint outline of someone standing there. I didn't speak, didn't move. Another knock, then silence. When I finally pulled the curtain back, no one was there. The next morning, I checked out early. My bags were packed, car already loaded, but I couldn't leave without one last walk. Just to say goodbye to the ocean, the only peaceful part of the trip that hadn't yet been tainted. The path to the beach was damp from overnight fog, and the early sun had only just begun to burn it away. Mist clung to the shrubs lining the trail. Everything looked quiet, still, like the world was holding its breath. The beach was empty, or so I thought. I walked slowly, soaking in the breeze, the rhythmic crash of the tide. I wanted to remember this part. Not the motel, not the knocking, just this. Then halfway down the trail I heard footsteps behind me, steady, gaining. crunching against the gravel path, deliberate. My stomach turned. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I turned around. It was him, closer now than he'd ever been. His hands were in his jacket pockets, his head tilted just slightly to one side, like he was curious, like he was amused. He smiled. "You always come here alone," he said, his voice calm and almost cheerful. It chilled me more than if he'd shouted. I didn't wait. I ran. Heart pounding, legs burning, I sprinted back up the trail, the gravel slipping beneath my sneakers. He didn't chase me, not really, just followed, slow and calm. But I knew what it meant. When I reached the lot, I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and watched as he stepped out of the trees. He stopped at the edge of the lot, just staring. I went to the sheriff's station before I left town, gripping my phone like a lifeline. My hands were still shaking as I waited at the front desk, glancing over my shoulder more times than I cared to admit. When the deputy finally called me in, I tried to keep my voice steady as I gave a description. Height, build, clothing, the way he moved. I showed them the photos I had taken, including a blurry one from my zoom lens where he stood motionless near the rocks, watching the water, or watching me. The deputy nodded slowly, jotting things down on a yellow notepad. Another officer leaned over to glance at the screen, exchanged a look with the first, then said the usual, "We'll look into it." But that was it. No further questions. No incident report. No request for my ID. They didn't ask for my name. Not even once. It's been 6 months. Sometimes I still walk on the beach near my apartment, trying to reclaim that sense of peace I used to find in the sound of waves and the early morning fog. But I never stay long anymore. I find myself checking over my shoulder too often. The presence I felt in that small coastal town still lingers, shadowing even the safest places. I keep pepper spray in every purse, even the ones I rarely use. There's a camera mounted near every door and window in my apartment. I double-check every lock before bed, and then check them again. At night, I still find myself staring at the curtains, not because I hear something outside, but because I don't. That thick, oppressive silence has become something I dread. A void where sound should be, a space where he could be. Silence scares me now, because I never saw his car, and I never saw him leave. And that means, in some ways, he never really did.